Now joining us on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline is Josh Maurer, play-by-play voice for the UMass Minutemen, getting ready for the Cougars and Minutemen tomorrow. Josh, thanks for joining the program.
You got it. Jarom and Brian, thanks for having me. Good morning.
It's great to have you. Good morning. And it will be a good morning. Early kick, especially in the mountain time for fans watching the game. Noon kick Eastern time. But first, let's talk about the game that you called last week against Liberty. How crazy was that game? 62-59 in triple overtime against Liberty. A win for UMass. 777 total yards.
Yeah. Well, you were just talking about the basketball game this weekend. Doesn't that sound like that should have been a basketball score?
Yes, absolutely.
62-59. Incredible. I thought it was one of the most gutsy wins that I've seen. I've been calling UMass football for 11 seasons. And if it's not at the top, it's right near it for the way that they were able to hang in there and win a game. Now, a lot of the numbers, you say 777 yards, which is more than video game-like, but a lot of that did end up coming in the three overtimes when UMass scored on all three of its possessions. But still, they had 700 yards in regulation. It was one of those games where you almost had to see it to believe it because there were so many different crazy plays, great plays, dumb penalties, mistakes, turnovers, heroes, villains. But at the end of the day, UMass has a wide receiver I know we're going to talk a lot about named Andy Isabella. You guys have seen him actually play in Provo the last couple of years before he really became the breakout star that he has been as a senior. He had 300-plus receiving yards. That just never happens. It broke Victor Cruz's school record. And I think everybody's probably heard of Victor Cruz by now. So what he did through the air with the quarterback, Ross Comas, it was impressive. And then UMass trailed that game, guys, by 14 points with about 7 minutes left.
Wow.
But they had two very long touchdown drives right at the end of the fourth quarter that got it into overtime. Everything had to go right. They converted 3 fourth downs on those drives. They ended up tying it in the final seconds. And then, as I said, they had to score in every possession in overtime because Liberty, you know, when you're putting up 59 points, obviously you're hard to stop also. But UMass got an interception to start the third overtime, and then they ended up kicking the game-winning field goal. So a crazy game, no question about it. If you look at just in general the way college football is played these days, I guess it's not overly surprising because there's just so many points being put up. But that one, even from recent standards, that one kind of takes the cake, it seems to me.
Well, and to me, that's the same idea I have, which is, you know, that's just not normal, right? Regardless of the situation.
No. Yeah.
And I think that's what scares me as a former player, understanding momentum and, you know, crazy spectacular games like that. You can, you know, ride that wave into the next week. And when you look at a team like BYU, who's had some ups and downs, and most recently, you know, some heartbreaking losses, I am nervous. And you look at last year, UMass pulled off the win in Provo. What do you think that UMass has to do this week, or if I would say what do or do they have an opportunity to pull it off again this year, being at home?
I think they do. I will point out, though, when, you know, everybody back there looks at the geography or doesn't really know Massachusetts, the landscape of it, which I don't blame you if you don't. The game's going to be played at Gillette Stadium, which is the home of the Patriots. And that's a beautiful venue. It's great for all of us to go there. It is not a home game for UMass. UMass's campus is 2 hours to the west. And I would be willing to bet there will be more BYU fans in attendance tomorrow than UMass fans.
Well then.
So, you don't need me to tell you guys how well BYU can travel. There's alumni and supporters all over the country, and there's a lot of them in Massachusetts. We played a basketball game, you guys may remember, I think it was 5 years ago now, in Springfield, Massachusetts. BYU was essentially at UMass, but there were 2,000 BYU fans there. So I wouldn't think that the home field advantage is going to be that big of a deal. The one thing, of course, that you do have to take into account is the body clock. When you're playing at 12 o'clock Eastern, which, as you know, is 10 in the morning, back for what the guys on the Cougar sideline are used to, that does tend to, I think, play a factor in a football game. But in general, I don't think home field advantage will be a factor. I do think UMass has that momentum. They've got confidence knowing that they can play with BYU. You look at what happened in Provo 2 years ago, BYU just crushed UMass. It wasn't competitive. And then last season, the Minutemen proved to themselves that not only can they compete, but they can win a game against a proud program like BYU. At the time, and I still believe this, I said that was the biggest win stature-wise that UMass football has ever had. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that. This is a school that just 7 years ago was playing at the FCS level. So even though the transition has been slower than most of the fans would like, and it's been a struggle more than it's been a success, that was monumental last November because they proved that they could not only compete with, but defeat a program that goes to bowl games year in and year out. So that was big, and many of the players, most of the players who are going to be on the field for UMass tomorrow are going to remember that because they were out there last year.
We're talking to Josh Maurer, play-by-play voice of the UMass Minutemen, Cougars, and Minutemen tomorrow at noon Eastern time. What do you think makes Andy Isabella good, and what changed for him?
He's a speed demon. This guy came to UMass. The one thing that we knew about him, he was hardly recruited at all. I think UMass was his only scholarship offer to play football. He was a track star. That's what he did in high school. In the state of Ohio, he was a sprint champion. So he always had speed, and when he first came to campus, he was a running back. So I think that's what's changed most over the years is that he's just learned the nuances of playing the position. But my goodness, he's a tireless worker. Coach Whipple, the UMass head coach, says he's about as hard of a working wide receiver as he's ever been around in decades as a coach. So he works at his craft. He's a perfectionist. And I think what happens when you get used to the position is you become a more precise route runner, and you learn how to use your speed more to your advantage. I'll tell you guys, no matter who has guarded him the last couple of years, whether it's been a Liberty defense that struggles or whether it's been an SEC defense, UMass has played a lot of SEC teams over the last few years, they haven't been able to guard Andy Isabella. UMass does not have a lot of quote-unquote Power 5 type talented players, but Andy would not be out of place in any school in the country. He would start at Alabama. I'm not kidding you. He just knows how to get open on every play. And Coach Whipple is an offensive coach, so he's smart enough to utilize him. They'll line him up all over the field. It's not like he's just sprinting go routes on every play. He can do that. And last week, obviously, if you go over 300 yards in a game, you do just run a lot of deep balls and catch them. But they'll go across the middle. They'll throw him some out patterns. They'll get him involved in the run game on some jet sweeps. And Pete Brock, who calls the games with me on UMass Radio, he was an offensive lineman for the New England Patriots for a very long time. And Pete knows better than I do. He says that he thinks Andy's going to be an NFL player, even though he's shorter than I am, guys. He's about 5'8". But the way that he's become a precise route runner with the speed that he has and the ability to catch every football thrown his way, he's going to probably be playing on Sundays somewhere next year.
I agree with you there. I mean, when you look at the numbers and stats, I mean, he's definitely going to get a look and an opportunity. And as a corner, I'm shorter than him. I'm 5'6". So hopefully that makes you feel good, brightens up your day. But I always loved playing against receivers that were 6'1", 2, 3, because I could see their hips easier. When you're shorter, it's hard to judge and be able to anticipate receivers breaking on a route. So that definitely helps out. Josh, we'll end with this one. If UMass upsets BYU tomorrow, what will they have done in order to do that?
I think, to be honest with you, Brian, it goes to defense. We've spent most of this conversation talking about UMass's offensive prowess, but the reason they won last year was because they had 7 sacks and they had 4 interceptions. Now, I realize that Zach Wilson's a more polished freshman quarterback than Joe Critchlow was last season when UMass was out in Provo. But I think it's going to take something similar defensively, maybe not 4 picks, maybe not 7 sacks, but they're going to have to figure out a way to turn the ball over and limit BYU's ground game. Guys, UMass, I'm going to tell it like it is. UMass's run defense has been really bad. Teams are averaging over 250 rushing yards a game against them. And that's the biggest reason that UMass is probably not going to go to a bowl game this year. With the offense, the way that it's performed, they should have a couple of more wins, but they just haven't been able to slow down opposing rushing attacks. And so while I know BYU's stable of running backs hasn't been the best this year, I would anticipate that that's what the Cougars are going to do. They're going to line up, try to run the football, pound it down the field, and for 4 quarters just play the time of possession, control the clock game, and try to ground out 4 or 5 touchdowns, and that could be enough to win the game. So for me, for UMass, they're going to have to figure out a way to stop them from doing that, kind of the way they did last year at Lavelle Edwards Stadium.
Well, Josh, we appreciate the time and look forward to the matchup tomorrow at noon Eastern Time, live from Gillette in Foxborough. Thanks for the time.
You got it, guys. It was great to be with you.
Thanks, Josh.